Before I get into this part, I'm going to leave a poll in the pinned comment for you to vote on. It'll ask if you think the present version of Android 18 should get with Kale or Krillin, since as of right now I've set it up as a sort of love triangle between the three. Anyway, as a brief break from the main timeline, I figured now would be a good time to look at the timeline feature Kale comes from. It starts in a similar way to the timeline we have seen so far, with Goku not returning to Earth right away after the defeat of Frieza. As Gohan was in his bedroom studying, he notices a high key signature on his way towards the Earth. He then gets a phone call from Krillin, as he tells Gohan that he, Kale, and Sala all noticed this key too, and asks if he realized who it was. Even up on King Kai's planet, he noticed this key as well, which when he realized who it belonged to, he was left in a state of disbelief. Then out in the wastelands, Piccolo was in a similar state of shock as he sensed this key as well. At Capsule Corporation, Vegeta noticed this key too and told Yamcha it was Frieza, which Oolong, Puar, and Bulma overheard and say this as well, so Yamcha asked if he was sure that it was Frieza. In the wastelands again, Tien and Shatsu have noticed it as well, but he also picked up on a second key signature with Frieza, which, of course, this is Mecha Frieza and King Cold. The Cold still suggests just blowing up Earth from space and being done with it, but Frieza refuses. Back with Gohan, he changes into his Saiyan armor and flies off, as he then meets up with Krillin, Sala, and Kale. After Vegeta and Yamcha arrived, Bulma's shown up since she wanted to see what her doom looks like. Tien and Shatsu then arrived, but Vegeta then tells them all to suppress their ki. He then points out that Piccolo has already done so, which is when the others realize Piccolo was there. Gohan, Krillin, Sala, and Kale then arrive, but this is when King Cold and Frieza then land on the Earth, which Vegeta tells them to keep their ki lowered so they can walk over and not get noticed on the Scouters. Then as Yamcha tries to say it's hopeless, Piccolo asks if they should just lay down and die then, since it isn't any more hopeless if they fight. Vegeta then says it's not just hopeless for them, but it's also the end of the Earth. As Frieza and Cold exit their ship, Frieza tells his army to go and kill all the Earthlings they can. Out of nowhere, Goku then appears in front of Cold, Mecha Frieza, and his army, as he swiftly takes out Frieza's soldiers. The heroes all notice Goku's arrival right away, but regardless, when he goes Super Saiyan, this angers Frieza. Then when Frieza tries to attack him, he would just send a death ball at Goku to try and end him quickly. He would fire a Kamehameha back, which this would easily overpower the Mechanical Tyrant's death ball. With a combined blast of his death ball and Goku's Kamehameha, he would be disintegrated. At this point, Vegeta would fly in towards the battlefield, so the other heroes follow him. Regardless, King Cold and Goku will land on the ground, as he then tries to offer Goku to take his place as his right-hand man. Of course, Goku would refuse this, so Cold will then go on to ask Goku about that technique he used, which, he tells Goku that without it, he would have never been able to defeat Frieza. So, he agrees not to use it in their fight, so when Cold tries to attack him, he easily stops all his attacks. He would then blast him through the chest with a regular ki blast. As Cold falls to the ground, Goku would blast him with the same blast again, killing him, before destroying Cold's ship shortly afterwards. He then drops to his base form. As the other heroes arrive, Goku then goes on to explain where he's been and how he got there so fast, as he then demonstrates the instant transmission to them. They then all catch up for a while and return home, as they don't have a reason to make plans to train intensely, since there is no known upcoming threat. However, Goku might try and train with Kale a little, since he thought he might be able to help her control her anger with some of the things he learned on Yardrat. Also, with Kale and Sala, they'd likely get their own house in this timeline, with the help of Bulma. Since Vegeta is at Capsule Corporation, they don't want to stay there, but they might stop by to see Bulma sometimes. It's also likely that they would go to Goku's house often to see Goku and Gohan. They would probably go to Kame's house often too so that they could see Krillin as well, which, even though Kale still wasn't much of a fighter at this point, they might have some sparring sessions together. Even if they don't train together often, Kale will still develop closer friendships with them. Krillin might grow romantic feelings for her, but Caulifla still had that quote in reference to Cabba where she said, "Kale, don't get the wrong idea. I'm not so cheap that I'd fall for someone like this." So that quote seems to imply to me that Kale's romantically attracted to females instead of males, so Krillin doesn't have a chance with her. He wouldn't know this though until he tried to confess his feelings to her, which would end up with her rejecting him. After that happens, their friendship would likely become awkward and strained, as Krillin would probably be pained to see her afterwards. So she might spend more time hanging out with Goku and Gohan, or Bulma after that happens. Also, something that mentions that since she still has her interest in nature, she might start a garden again and get some enclosures built with the help of Bulma so she can study the wildlife on Earth. Then with her spending more time at Goku's, there might be more training sessions with the two. However, these training sessions eventually stop, as one day Goku started to fall ill with a mysterious disease, which they couldn't do much to be able to help Goku, since everything they tried didn't work. One day, all the heroes were gathered outside of Goku's house, where Bulma was holding a crying Trunks. Oolong and Puar then notice Gohan arriving, as he quickly enters the house. Once inside, he is told by Chi-Chi that his father, Goku, has passed away, which, since it was by natural causes this time, he can't be wished back. This is when Krillin then informs the other heroes that Goku has passed, which shocks everyone and briefly puts Vegeta into a state of disbelief. After this happened, Kale and Solo would likely still go to Goku's house to try and spend time with Gohan, though he would be in a state of mourning for a while. Around 6 months later, on May 12th, age 767, a mysterious duo began their attack on an island 9 kilometers southwest of South City at about 10 AM. The heroes quickly arrived to try and take them on, with Piccolo being the first one to try and fight them, though he's quickly killed by Android 18, making him the first of the heroes to die. Up on Kami's lookout, since Piccolo has died, Kami disappears as well, which would cause the Dragon Balls to turn to stone. Also, during this time, Gohan and Bulma were on their way towards the battlefield in a Capsule Corporation ship. They noticed that Shenron was summoned, which is when the Pilaf gang wished to have their youth restored, so the Pilaf gang returns to being infants. Then Bulma and Gohan notice Shenron groaning in pain and disappearing, which they realize right away that Piccolo, and by extension Kami, has died. As they start crying, they then decide to make their escape, so they leave. Back with the heroes and the androids, even though he was a Super Saiyan, Vegeta is killed by Android 17. After that, Yamcha tries to fight them, but he is taken out by 17 as well. Following Yamcha's death, Tien Shinhan is attacked by 18, though he is swiftly killed too. Normally, Krillin would be the next one to fight and be killed, but Kale's anger was quickly rising, as all her friends were dying. This anger eventually takes hold of her, and she snaps into her wrathful form, as she then charges at both androids. This briefly catches them off guard, so she would be beating them down at first. However, this doesn't last long, as they would eventually regain their composure and start to beat Kale down together. Krillin would step in the way and get in between Kale and the androids. Even though she didn't have feelings for him in return, he still cared for her and wanted to protect her. So, the ruthless duo then kills Krillin as they both fire a finger beam at him, shooting him in the head with it. After he is killed, Kale's anger would start to rise even more, but she still can't do much against the androids. Finally, before they could finish Kale off, Sala would get in the way of them killing her. Of course, the androids would just remorselessly kill her instead. This would push Kale's anger over the edge once more, as she starts to scream in rage. A green beam then surrounds her and shoots into the sky, as the ground starts to get ripped up at her feet, forming a crater beneath her. As she rises from the crater, her hair is now spiky and blonde, though she is still encased in a spear of green energy. Though, the spear eventually dissipates as she fires a barrage of ki blasts at the androids, revealing she has become a Super Saiyan for the first time. Once she is in this form, she would start beating the androids down again. However, even with this form, she doesn't stand much of a chance against the mechanical menaces. So, they would eventually knock her out, which causes her to fall back into her base form. They were going to finish her off, but since her continually growing a power piqued their interest, the android duo decided to keep her around as a plaything. They then set their sights on Shatsu, as he was the only hero left, but he is easily killed by the androids. They then leave the dead heroes and the unconscious Kale there as they leave. Eventually Gohan would pick up on Kale's faint ki, so he and Bulma would return in their ship to rescue Kale. Also, it's unknown when future Gohan first went Super Saiyan, but I think it's likely it happened when he arrived at the battlefield. All his friends would be lying there, dead, and his father figure, Piccolo, would be dead as well. He would feel a horrible pain from that, which would slowly turn into a feeling of rage. As the ground starts to crumble at his feet, Bulma would be confused about what was happening at first, though, when his hair starts flashing between black and yellow, he would realize what is happening. As he lets out a yell in anger, his rage overtakes him, and he becomes a Super Saiyan for the first time. Bulma would rush over to him and try to calm him down, explaining that he needs to snap out of this. If they waste any more time, Kale will likely die, and the androids might come back if they notice Gohan's spike in power. Regardless, since he was so young, he couldn't really handle the strain of the form, so he fell unconscious as he reverted to his base form. So, Bulma had to take the unconscious Gohan back into her ship. She then helped the barely alive Kale into her ship as well, which she then flew back to Capsule Corporation, and with the help of Dr. Briefs, she brought Gohan and Kale inside. Bulma would have helped Kale through the recovery process while also developing bunkers for people to hide in just in case the androids attacked there. This beating Kale received and the death of most of the heroes would be a big wake-up call to her. While she was recovering in the hospital, she would have plenty of time to reflect on her actions, which she would quickly realize that her peaceful nature of sitting on the sidelines would no longer be viable. This does seem like a drastic change in her personality, but she also just went through a drastic situation, where all her family and most of her friends died in the span of a day. If she wants to protect the remaining people she cares about, she'll have to toughen up to survive in this harsh world. In this time of recovery, she would also be racked with guilt about Krillin's death, since she rejected him and essentially ignored him afterwards, but he still had some of his feelings for her and tried to protect her until the bitter end. Over the years, she would work to achieve Super Saiyan again and get a better control of her anger. She would also start training Gohan, and eventually Trunks once he reached an age that he could fight. Kale would also help Bulma in her lab when she needed it, so she's intelligent as well. 13 years later, Kale was able to eventually access Super Saiyan at will, while Gohan learned to access it at will too. Trunks, on the other hand, was on the verge of achieving this form, but he had not managed to yet. One day, the androids started to attack Superworld, so Kale, Gohan, and Trunks arrive there to take them on. 18, Trunks, and Kale stay on the sidelines at first, while Gohan begins to take on 17. He receives some hits from the android, but when he turns Super Saiyan, he gains control of the fight. 18 would then join the fight, which the two androids would be overpowering Gohan. So, Kale would then turn Super Saiyan and jump into the fight, and she starts to fight 17 with Gohan, while Trunks jumps in and starts to fight 18. He is no match for her, but he fights her for a minute, though he is then defeated easily. Gohan and Kale then save him from dying, but they must hide in the debris of the amusement park. Since the androids couldn't find them, they start to bomb the park to try and draw them out of hiding. They manage to survive these blasts, but Gohan's left arm is still blown off. Kale will likely have received some type of injury as well, though I'm not sure what this injury could have been. Since they only have one senzu bean with them, they give it to Trunks. The Gohan and Kale then fall unconscious. Trunks then takes them to Capsule Corporation, which is where they take some time off to recover. Of course, Future Bulma helps them through the recovery process, though after the two fully recover, they go back to training Trunks. One day, Gohan was training Trunks alone, since Kale was out looking for supplies for them. However, their training session is cut short when they notice that the androids were starting to attack Pepper Town. Trunks pleads to fight with Gohan, but he knocks him unconscious so he can't join the fight. He then heads off towards Pepper Town, where he turns Super Saiyan and ambushes Android 17. Despite him having the handicap of only having one arm, he puts up a good fight, though, as it starts to rain, the androids gang up on him and knock him to the ground. As they use their excelled dance technique, they kill the fallen warrior. As his energy vanishes, Trunks awakens, so he heads to the city to search for Gohan. Once there, he finds Gohan's dead body, so it appears that their training has failed. However, the rage within him is unleashed at this moment, as he finally becomes a Super Saiyan, though, unfortunately, his mentor is no longer there to congratulate him on becoming a Super Saiyan. When he eventually calms down somewhat and returns to Capsule Corporation, he would fill Bulma and Kale in on what happened. His relationship with Kale would become tense after this, since he would somewhat blame her for Gohan's death. Kale blamed herself for his death too, though, since she thinks if she was there with Gohan, he would have stood a better chance. She would essentially fall into a state of shock and inaction after this, so if Trunks ever went to fight the androids, she couldn't bring herself to go along. She finally thought she was over the state of inaction after the other heroes died, but Gohan's death just plunged her into it again. This will only further Trunks' contempt for her, but Bulma would still talk with Kale, trying to convince her that it wasn't her fault. Things would roughly go the same way for the next 3 years, that once Bulma starts working on the time machine, Kale would be helping her. Even if she couldn't bring herself to fight, she was able to use her intelligence to help Bulma. Then when Trunks walks in and says he doesn't need a time machine to beat the androids, since he is a Super Saiyan, Bulma reminds him that Gohan was too, but that still wasn't enough. This would start an argument between Trunks, Kale, and Bulma, as he still blamed Kale for Gohan's death. He would try to say that Gohan would have won if only Kale was there, but regardless, when the news bulletin about the androids attacking Bridgetown comes over the radio, he doesn't stick around to hear Bulma's pleas for him to stay. Even Kale would try to stop him, but he wouldn't listen since he was angry at this time, so he just takes off towards Bridgetown right away. Trunks then finds the mechanical menaces in a now destroyed city, so he starts to fight with them, as he turns Super Saiyan. However, since he's consumed by rage at this point, he is fighting sloppily. He would have been completely outclassed regardless, but with his anger controlling him, he can't even land a hit on the androids. They were hoping for more of a challenge, as after that one-armed fighter died, they have been bored. The girl hasn't been showing up to fight anymore, and only this weak brat shown up, but he couldn't provide any fun for them since he wasn't a challenge. So, they would quickly get bored of this fight, as they started to pummel Trunks. 17 would take over in pummeling him, as he beats him down to the point that Trunks can no longer stay in his Super Saiyan form once he falls to his base form. This fight would be hopeless, as he couldn't provide a challenge for the mechanical menaces now. So, as 17 pummels him into the ground, 18 begins to charge a pink blast above them, which 17 gets out of the way when she goes to fire it. Since Trunks was too beaten down to move, he takes 18's Infinity Bullet head on, which this barrage of pink blast easily kills the weakened young Saiyan, as he had no chance of surviving it. Back at Capsule Corporation, Kale would have noticed Trunks' ki disappearing right away. As she was fearing the worst, she would leave without even saying a word to Bulma, as she turns into a Super Saiyan in case the androids were there. When she arrives, the town is completely ruined, but the main shock to Kale is when she finds Trunks. He would be lying in a crater, lifeless, and she would realize this was all her fault. If only she tried to help Gohan back then, they never would have developed a tense relationship. Or if she tried harder to stop Trunks from leaving, or if she went with him, he wouldn't have died against the androids. As she starts to cry and her anger starts to build, she starts to yell in rage. The ground would start shaking and crumbling around her, with stones floating into the sky around her. Lightning starts striking nearby, as a green sphere surrounds her. As she starts yelling louder, she becomes taller and bulkier, her hair takes on a green tint, and her eyes become solid white. In this berserker form, she wouldn't be able to control herself. She would be flying around in a rampage, searching for the androids. She would never find them, as they left the city and are far gone by now. So, eventually, the strain of this form would catch up to her, as she couldn't maintain it for long. Her body eventually gives out, but she falls unconscious, so she reverts to her base form. She would eventually wake back up and return to Capsule Corporation, where she fills Bulma in on what happened to Trunks. While this does sadden Bulma immensely, she likely wouldn't blame Kale like Trunks did, since she was more understanding than he was. The next day, since the androids seemingly no longer had an adversary, they quickly got bored and started to attack another town, which this time it is Ginger Town. Since Kale wanted to avenge both Trunks and Gohan, and she wanted to get over her state of inaction, she left for Ginger Town immediately. When she arrived and started to fight the androids, she would quickly turn Super Saiyan. She would put up a better fight than Trunks, but she still didn't stand a chance against the two, so she would try to tap into that unknown power she had unlocked the previous day, but she wasn't able to. She had no idea what it was or how to achieve it again, but since she couldn't go back into it, the androids would start beating her down. 18 would eventually knock her into the ground and use a powerful blast against her, with the androids leaving shortly afterwards. Kale would have miraculously survived this blast, but she was in bad shape, as she falls unconscious again. When she awakens, she's back in Capsule Corporation with Bulma nearby. They discuss if they'll still go through with the time machine plan, and Kale agrees to be the one to use it. Bulma and Kale eventually finish making the time machine, though in between Kale working on it, she would still try to train and achieve that mysterious form again, but she wasn't able to. Anyway, Kale then takes the heart virus medicine and returns to the past, as Bulma wishes her good luck. This is where we would see Kale's fight with Mecha Frieza and King Cold, and then her sparring match with Goku, as she gives them the medicine and warns the heroes about the androids, before promising to return to help them. She would then return shortly afterwards, as she fills Bulma in on everything that had happened in the past. Over the next year, they would work on gathering fuel for the time machine again, so that Kale could go back and keep her promise about helping the heroes when the androids arrive. So, once they got enough fuel, they start to prepare the time machine for her journey into the past again. Once in the time machine, she waves goodbye to Bulma, who again wishes her good luck, as she goes back to the past once more.